The stars had never seemed so cold to Commander Jake Morrison as they did that morning. He stood on the bridge of the UES horizon, watching the view screen display an object that shouldn't exist. It was a ship, massive and angular, made of materials that seemed to drink in the light around it. Nothing in the human database matched its design. "Distance?" Jake asked, keeping his voice steady even though his heart hammered in his chest. 40,000 kilometers and closing, replied Casey Brooks, the ship's pilot. Her hands moved across the console with practiced ease, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. They both knew what this meant. After centuries of searching, humanity had finally found proof they weren't alone in the universe. Or rather, someone had found them. The communications officer turned in his seat, his face pale. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission. It's translating automatically somehow. They're sending the translation protocol directly into our systems." Jake nodded slowly. "Put it on screen." The view screen flickered, and suddenly Jake was looking at something that made his breath catch. The creature before him was tall, easily 8 feet, with forearms and skin that shimmered like oil on water. Its eyes were large and dark, positioned on the sides of its head like a predator built to see everything. When it spoke, its mouth didn't quite match the words Jake heard. "Primitive humans of the vessel horizon," the alien said, its voice carrying an edge of amusement that needed no translation. "I am Warprime Kelthax of the Vrexian Collective. You have entered space claimed by the Collective for 3,000 of your years. Your species is unknown to us, which means you are without permission to be here." Jake stepped forward, aware that every word mattered now. "I am Commander Jake Morrison. We come in peace. We didn't know this space was claimed. We're explorers, not invaders." Kelthax made a sound that might have been laughter. "Peace." Yes, primitive species always speak of peace when they first encounter their superiors. You will listen now. The Vrexian Collective consists of 4 species who have ruled this sector since before your kind learned to make fire. We have studied your transmissions, your broadcasts, your primitive data streams. We know what you are. Behind Jake, Ben Carter, the chief engineer, was frantically working his console. He caught Jake's eye and shook his head slightly. The alien ship's technology was beyond anything they'd seen. If it came to a fight, the horizon wouldn't last 5 minutes. "We seek only peaceful coexistence," Jake said carefully. "Perhaps we can establish diplomatic relations. Share knowledge and culture." "You misunderstand your position, human," Kelthax replied. The amusement was gone from his voice now. "This is not a negotiation. The Collective has analyzed your species. You are slow, weak. Your reaction times are poor. Your technology is primitive. You have nothing we want except your obedience. You have 2 choices. Submit to collective authority or be eliminated. You have 10 of your days to decide." The screen went dark. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. "Did that just happen?" Casey asked finally. "Did we just get threatened by aliens?" "Get me a direct line to Earth Command," Jake said quietly. "Secure channel. And wake up, everyone. I want every officer in the briefing room in 20 minutes." The next few days passed in a blur of frantic activity. The horizon rushed back toward human space, transmitting everything they'd learned. Earth Command's response was swift and clear. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Diplomatic envoys were dispatched. Military forces were quietly mobilized. Humanity scrambled to present a united front. Jake found himself assigned to the diplomatic mission, his ship part of a small fleet escorting the envoys to a neutral station called Outpost 7. It was a civilian facility on the edge of human territory, home to 15,000 miners and their families. It seemed like neutral ground for talks. The Vrexian ships arrived exactly on schedule, their vessels moving with a grace that human ships couldn't match. Jake watched them dock with growing unease. Everything about the aliens spoke of supreme confidence, of a civilization that had forgotten what it meant to be challenged. The negotiations lasted 3 days. Jake wasn't in the room, but he heard the reports. The Vrexians weren't interested in compromise. They wanted complete submission. Humanity would become a client species, surrendering their independence in exchange for being allowed to exist. Their technology would be confiscated. Their worlds would be monitored. Their culture would be absorbed into the Collective. The human diplomats refused. Politely at first, then more firmly as it became clear the Vrexians expected simple capitulation. On the 3rd day, the Vrexians left without another word. Jake felt relief wash over him as their ships departed. Maybe they'd accepted the refusal. Maybe they'd leave humanity alone to develop on their own. Maybe first contact didn't have to end in blood. He was wrong. 6 hours after the Vrexian ships left, they returned to Outpost 7 at full combat speed. The civilian station had minimal defenses, never expecting to be a military target. The Vrexians didn't send a warning. They didn't offer surrender terms. They simply opened fire. Jake watched in horror as weapons tore through the station's hull. Atmosphere vented into space, carrying bodies with it. The station's distress calls filled every channel, screaming for help that couldn't arrive in time. 15,000 people, most of them families, minors, children. The Horizon and 2 other military escorts tried to intervene, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Vrexian weapons carved through their shields like they didn't exist. Jake ordered his crew to evacuate the station, to save who they could. They managed to rescue 3,000 people before the Vrexians destroyed the station completely, reducing it to debris and frozen corpses. Then the Vrexian ships left again, leaving the survivors floating in their rescue pods, watching the remains of their home drift through space. A transmission came through, Kelthax's face filling every screen. "This is what resistance brings you, humans. Submit or every station, every colony, every world will share this fate. You have seen our power. You have seen your weakness. Choose wisely." Jake stood on his bridge, surrounded by shocked and grieving crew members, and felt something cold settle in his chest. The Vrexians had made a mistake. They thought they'd demonstrated their power, that they'd frightened humanity into submission. Instead, they'd just declared war on a species they didn't understand at all. "Get me Earth Command," Jake said quietly. "Tell them we're coming home. And tell them the war has started." Behind him, Casey Brooks began plotting the fastest course back to Earth. Ben Carter started running diagnostics on every weapon system they had, looking for any edge, any advantage. Across human space, the same scene was playing out on hundreds of ships and stations. The Vrexians had attacked believing the war would be over in days. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 months had passed since the destruction of Outpost 7, and the war was not going the way anyone expected. Captain Ethan Cross stood in the command center of New Haven Colony, studying the tactical display with exhausted eyes. The Vrexians controlled the space around the planet, their ships patrolling in patterns that seemed designed to mock humanity's inability to challenge them directly. "They're back," Lieutenant Maya Stone announced from her station. "Same formation as yesterday. 3 cruisers, 1 destroyer. They'll bombard the northern settlements again unless we do something." Ethan rubbed his face, feeling the 3 days of stubble there. Sleep was a luxury nobody could afford anymore. "What's our status?" 2 orbital defense platforms still operational. Ground batteries at 60%. "We've got maybe 1 good fight left in us before they overwhelm the defenses." Maya pulled up another screen. "But I've been thinking. They always approach from the same vector. Always the same timing. They're predictable because they don't think we can hurt them." "We can't hurt them," Ethan pointed out. "Not in direct combat. Their shields absorb everything we throw at them." "Not everything." Maya's fingers danced across her console. "We've been fighting them wrong, trying to match them shot for shot. But what if we don't fight them at all? What if we just make them waste their time?" Ethan leaned closer, interested despite his exhaustion. Maya had proven herself brilliant at finding solutions where none seemed to exist. "Keep talking. The Vrexians are efficient. They arrive, they bombard, they leave. 10 minutes maximum exposure. But what if we make them chase ghosts? False signals, decoy installations, anything to make them waste ammunition and time. They'll eventually have to return to their carriers to resupply. That's when the real defenses hit them. When they're not expecting it." It wasn't much of a plan. It wouldn't win the war. But it might save lives today, and that was all they could hope for right now. "Do it," Ethan said. "Whatever you need." The Vrexian ships approached New Haven exactly on schedule, their weapons charging for another bombardment. But this time, their sensors detected dozens of new installations across the planet's surface. New defense platforms, new weapon batteries, new shield generators, targets they couldn't ignore. They opened fire, pouring destructive energy into the targets. It took them 15 minutes to realize they were shooting at empty buildings rigged with signal generators. By then, they'd exhausted their primary weapons and New Haven's real defenses opened up, damaging one of the cruisers before the Vrexian ships retreated. It was a small victory, but it was a victory. News spread across human space within hours. New Haven had survived. The Vrexians could be tricked, could be frustrated, could be forced to waste resources. Across the war zone, other commanders began adapting similar tactics. If humans couldn't win direct fights, they wouldn't fight directly. They'd ambush. They'd retreat. They'd set traps. They'd make every inch of space the Vrexians claimed cost them in time, ammunition, and patience. On the Vrexian command ship, War Prime Kelthax stared at reports that made no sense. 3 months into what should have been a simple extermination, humanity still fought. They'd lost every major battle, abandoned dozens of colonies, suffered casualties in the millions. By every logical measure, they should have surrendered weeks ago. Instead, they were getting harder to fight. Their tactics evolved constantly. Strategies that worked once never worked twice. They learned from every defeat, adapted to every victory. It was inefficient and wasteful, and it was working. "Explain this to me," Kelthax demanded of his strategic advisor, a Vrexian named Orthax who'd planned the invasion. "The humans are primitives, slow reflexes, weak bodies, poor technology. Why do they still resist?" Orthax studied the data with his forearms folded in a gesture of uncertainty. "They fight illogically, War Prime. They sacrifice ships to save colonies with no strategic value. They refuse to surrender positions even when surrounded. They coordinate across impossible distances with primitive communications. And they improvise constantly, changing tactics faster than we can counter them. Then we change our approach," Kelthax decided. "No more small raids. We'll assault their command structure directly, break their leadership, and the rest will crumble." "Where is their military headquarters?" "Europa Station, orbiting their 4th planet. It's their primary strategic coordination center. Destroying it would cripple their ability to organize resistance." Kelthax studied the tactical display, his large eyes processing information faster than any human could manage. Europa Station was heavily defended, but the Vrexian fleet was more powerful. It would be a decisive battle, one that would finally end this irritating conflict. "Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. I will personally lead the assault. I want the human commanders to see Vrexian superiority before they die." The order rippled through the collective's forces. Ships began gathering, the largest military concentration since the war began. Kelthax would bring overwhelming force, and he would broadcast the battle across all human worlds. They would watch their leaders fall, and they would finally accept the inevitable. Back on Europa Station, Admiral Greg Foster received the intelligence reports with grim acceptance. The Vrexians were coming, and Europa didn't have the strength to stop them. He could evacuate, preserve the command structure to fight another day, but evacuating would mean abandoning 30,000 station personnel to certain death. "We hold," Greg announced to his senior staff. "We evacuate non-essential personnel, but command stays. We make them pay for every meter of corridor. Maybe we buy Earth enough time to prepare something, anything." Lieutenant Nina Brooks, his aide, didn't argue. She'd learned that arguing with the Admiral was pointless once he'd made up his mind. Instead, she began organizing the defense, coordinating with the Marine detachments, preparing for the boarding action that would inevitably come. Throughout the station, Marines prepared for a battle they knew they couldn't win. Sergeant Danny Hayes checked his rifle for the 100th time, making sure every charge pack was fully loaded. Around him, his squad did the same. Corporal Lisa Grant, Private Ryan Webb, and a dozen others whose names he'd learned to treasure because he knew most of them wouldn't survive the week. "Think we'll stop them, Sarge?" Ryan asked. He was young, barely 20, and trying hard not to show his fear. "No," Danny answered honestly, "but we'll slow them down. Make them remember that humans don't quit just because we're outmatched. That's got to count for something." It wasn't inspiring, but it was honest. They weren't heroes from stories. They were just people trying to do their jobs in impossible circumstances. That would have to be enough. The Vrexian fleet arrived 3 days later, their ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They were beautiful in a terrible way, their dark hulls reflecting nothing, their weapons glowing with barely contained power. They outnumbered the defending human forces 5-1. The battle for Europa Station began with a bombardment that lit up the sky. Human ships died quickly, outmatched and overwhelmed. The station's defenses held longer, but one by one they fell silent. Within 4 hours, Vrexian ships were docking with the station, and their warriors were pouring through the breaches. Danny Hayes stood in Corridor 7, watching his motion tracker fill with hostile contacts, and wondered if humanity would remember this day. If anyone would know what happened here, if their deaths would matter at all. Then the first Vrexians rounded the corner, moving faster than anything human had a right to move, and there was no more time for wondering. The Vrexian warriors moved through the outer sections of Europa Station like death itself. Their armor was black and seamless, absorbing the weak fire from human weapons without even slowing down. Each warrior stood 8 feet tall with 4 arms, 2 holding energy rifles, 2 wielding blades that glowed with contained power. They were fast, impossibly fast, their movements a blur that human eyes struggled to follow. Sergeant Danny Hayes had watched 3 of his Marines die in the first 30 seconds of contact. They'd opened fire the moment the Vrexians appeared, pouring everything they had into the approaching figures. The bullets sparked off alien armor like raindrops on stone. Then the Vrexians moved, crossing 20 meters in the time it took to blink, and suddenly Marines were falling with burns through their chests or missing limbs from those terrible blades. "Fall back," Danny screamed, dragging Ryan Webb away from the advancing warriors. "Fighting withdrawal, Pattern Delta?" Pattern Delta meant running while trying to look like you were retreating tactically. It meant leaving behind anyone who fell because stopping to help meant dying too. It meant accepting that the mission was no longer to stop the enemy, but to slow them down for a few more seconds. The Vrexians didn't pursue quickly. They moved through the station methodically, clearing each section with military precision. They didn't need to rush. They knew they'd already won. This was just the cleanup. Danny and what remained of his squad reached Corridor 7, the last defensive position before the command center. Other squads had fallen back here too. Maybe 40 Marines total from the 200 who'd started the defense. They set up behind barricades that would do nothing against alien weapons, checked ammunition they knew wouldn't penetrate alien armor, and waited. Corporal Lisa Grant settled in beside Danny, her face streaked with soot and blood that wasn't hers. "My sister's on Earth," she said quietly. "If we're going to die here, I want someone to tell her I was thinking about her." "Can you do that?" Danny started to promise, then stopped. He wouldn't survive this either. None of them would. Yeah, he lied. "I'll tell her." The Vrexians came 10 minutes later. They didn't charge or rush. They simply walked around the corner in a tight formation, weapons ready, shields overlapping. The humans opened fire immediately, pouring everything they had into the approaching aliens. Some shots found gaps in the armor. One Vrexian stumbled, another fell. But the rest kept coming, returning fire with weapons that turned Marine positions into molten slag. The battle became chaos. Danny fired until his rifle overheated, switched to his sidearm, kept firing. Beside him, Lisa threw a grenade that actually took down 2 Vrexians before the blast. Ryan Webb charged a warrior with a combat knife, actually managed to stab between armor plates before a blade cut him nearly in half. More Marines died, then more. The Vrexians advanced meter by meter, unstoppable. But something strange was happening. The humans were learning. Each attack, each defense, they adjusted their tactics slightly. They started aiming for the joints in Vrexian armor, started predicting the aliens' movements, setting ambushes in side corridors, started working together in ways that multiplied their effectiveness. It wasn't enough. The Vrexians were still better, still faster, still stronger, but they weren't winning as easily as they expected. And for warriors who'd never faced real resistance before, that was disturbing. War Prime Kelthax walked through the carnage with his honor guard, observing the human dead with something like respect. They'd fought well for primitives, better than expected, but they'd still lost, as was inevitable. Now came the important part of the mission, executing the human leadership while broadcasting it to every human world, breaking their spirit completely. Ahead, the command center doors loomed, sealed but not for long. Kelthax's engineers were cutting through with plasma torches. Beyond those doors waited the human military leaders. He would kill them personally, letting all of humanity watch what resistance earned them. The doors fell inward with a crash. Beyond them was a large chamber filled with tactical displays and computer terminals, and in the center, standing alone, was Admiral Greg Foster. He was older than Kelthax expected, maybe 60 by human years, with gray hair and a face lined by stress. He wore a simple uniform with no weapons visible. Behind Foster, a door was closing, the evacuation tunnel that led to the emergency ships. Kelthax's tactical system showed life signs disappearing down that tunnel. The humans were evacuating their command staff while Foster stayed behind as a distraction. It was tactically sound if pointless. The collective would hunt them down eventually. War Prime Kelthax, Foster said calmly, as if greeting an expected guest rather than facing his executioner. I was told you like to handle important matters personally. I do, Kelthax agreed. He gestured and his honor guard spread out, securing the room. You are Admiral Greg Foster, commander of human military operations in this sector. Your resistance ends here. I will execute you and your people will watch and they will understand that continuing this war is futile. Maybe, Foster replied. He didn't move, didn't show fear, just stood there calmly waiting. But I think you've misunderstood something about humans. We don't stop fighting because we're outmatched. We stop fighting when we're dead. And even then, we make it expensive. Kelthax studied the human with his superior vision, analyzing threat levels and physical capabilities. Foster was old for a human, slower than the younger soldiers. No weapons detected, no armor. This would be over in seconds. You are correct that you will die here, but there is no need for your death to be prolonged. I can make it quick. I appreciate that, Foster said. Then surprisingly, he smiled. But I'm not dead yet. The door Foster had been blocking suddenly opened, and Lieutenant Nina Brooks emerged, followed by Danny Hayes, Lisa Grant, and a handful of other Marines who'd survived the battle. They were wounded, exhausted, armed only with combat knives since their guns were empty or destroyed. But they were still standing, still fighting. Kelthax's honor guard moved to intercept, but the War Prime raised a hand, stopping them. No, these humans have earned the right to die with their leader. I will honor their courage by ending this personally. He dismissed his guards with a gesture, sending them to secure the escape tunnels. This was a matter of warrior's pride now. He drew his ceremonial blade, a weapon passed down through generations of Rexian war primes. Its edge was monomolecular, sharp enough to cut through starship hulls. It had never failed him in single combat. It would not fail him now. Foster and Nina Brooks stood together, each holding a combat knife. Behind them, Danny Hayes and the others spread out, creating a loose defensive formation. They all knew this was suicide. The Vrexian would move faster than they could react, strike harder than they could block, kill them all in seconds. But they stood their ground anyway because that's what humans did. They fought impossible odds and died trying. And maybe that meant something even if they didn't live to see it matter. Kelthax moved forward slowly, giving the humans time to prepare themselves for death. It was a warrior's courtesy, one he'd never extended to an enemy before. But these humans, primitive and weak as they were, had fought well. They deserved that much respect. Your people should have surrendered, Kelthax said, raising his blade. This war has cost both our species too much. But it ends now with you. Then let's get it over with, Foster replied quietly. Kelthax struck, moving with the blinding speed that had never failed him in 300 years of combat. The blade moved so fast it seemed to teleport, cutting through the air toward Admiral Greg Foster's throat with enough force to decapitate him cleanly. In Kelthax's 300 years of combat experience, fighting across a dozen worlds against a dozen species, this strike had never been blocked, never been dodged, never been survived. But it stopped. Foster's hands closed around the blade mid-swing, stopping it centimeters from his neck. Blood immediately began running down his palms where the monomolecular edge cut into his skin. But his grip didn't waver. His face showed strain, pain, but not surprise. His eyes met Kelthax's, calm and calculating. For a frozen moment that seemed to stretch forever, Kelthax stared in complete disbelief. His combat computer was screaming alerts, recalculating probabilities, insisting that what just happened was impossible. Human reflexes weren't fast enough for this. Human strength wasn't sufficient to stop a Vrexian blade mid-strike. The math said this couldn't happen, but it had happened. And in Foster's steady gaze, Kelthax saw something that sent ice through his body. This hadn't been luck. The human had predicted the strike, read the telegraphing in Kelthax's stance and movement, positioned his hands perfectly to intercept. Despite being physically slower, despite being weaker, the human had turned those disadvantages into victory through pure tactical analysis and willpower that defied logic. The moment broke. Nina Brooks moved, her combat knife finding the weak point between Kelthax's helmet and chest plate, the gap all Vrexian armor had because the joints needed flexibility. Danny Hayes fired his sidearm the last 3 rounds in his magazine, into that same gap from point-blank range. The War Prime staggered backward, his blade falling from nerveless fingers. Kelthax's honor guard reacted instantly, charging back into the room, but they were too late. Their leader collapsed, his armor's medical system screaming warnings. Around the room, the recording systems that Kelthax had activated to broadcast his victory instead captured his defeat, transmitting it live across the Vrexian Collective's communication networks. The battle for the command center ended quickly after that. The honor guard killed Danny Hayes and Lisa Grant before Nina Brooks triggered the room's emergency lockdown, sealing everyone inside. Through the sealed doors, she could hear more Vrexians arriving, cutting through the barriers. They'd be through in minutes, but it didn't matter anymore. What mattered had already happened. Foster sat against a wall, holding his bleeding hands, watching Kelthax die. The Vrexian's breathing was labored, his forearms twitching randomly as his nervous system failed. His large eyes found Foster's face. "How?" Kelthax asked, his voice barely a whisper through his translator. "You're not fast enough. My blade moves at 100 meters per second. Human reaction time is 0.25 seconds. You can't react to what you can't see." "I didn't react to the blade," Foster replied, his voice tired but steady. "I reacted to you. Watched your shoulder drop slightly. Watched your weight shift forward. Watched your center arm twitch before the strike arm moved. You telegraphed the attack with your whole body. I just had to see it coming and put my hands where the blade would be." "But the pain," Kelthax managed. "The blade cuts through bone. How did you maintain grip?" Foster looked at his ruined hands, blood still dripping slowly onto the floor. "Because I had to. Because if I didn't, you'd kill everyone in this room and move on to killing everyone else. So I held on. That's what humans do. We endure what we must to protect what matters." Kelthax's eyes were dimming now, his breathing stopping. But he managed one more question. "You knew you would be wounded. Knew it would hurt. Yet you chose this." "Yes," Foster confirmed simply. "We measured wrong," Kelthax whispered. "We measured your bodies, your ships, your weapons. We never measured your will." His breathing stopped. The War Prime of the Vrexian Collective was dead, killed by a species he'd considered primitive. The doors finally breached and Vrexian warriors poured in. They found their leader dead, surrounded by human corpses and the few survivors who'd accepted they were about to join them. But instead of executing the survivors immediately, the warriors hesitated. They'd all watched the recording. They'd all seen what happened. Their supreme commander, the finest warrior in the collective, had been defeated by a human who was slower, weaker, and injured. It shouldn't have been possible. The Vrexian second-in-command entered the room, surveying the scene. He looked at Foster, at the dead War Prime, at the blade still lying on the floor. Then he made a decision that would change everything. "Ceasefire. Take the survivors into custody. Medical treatment for the wounded." He paused. "All of them. Including the humans." Nina Brooks stared at him in shock. "What?" "The war is over," the Vrexian said quietly. "We just don't know it yet. But we will. Everyone will." He gestured to the recording systems still transmitting. "This is being broadcast across both our networks right now. Every Vrexian, every human watching in real time. They saw what happened here. We all did." Across the Collective's territories, the footage was indeed being watched by billions. Command centers fell silent as military analysts studied every frame, trying to understand what they'd witnessed. Scientists ran calculations, checking and rechecking their data about human capabilities. Politicians and leaders watched with growing unease. The numbers all said the same thing. What Admiral Foster did was physically impossible for a human. His nervous system wasn't fast enough to track the blade. His muscles weren't strong enough to stop it. His pain tolerance couldn't possibly allow him to maintain grip while being cut to the bone. The math was absolute. It couldn't happen, but it had happened. They'd all watched it happen, which meant the math was measuring the wrong things. On the Collective's homeworld, Elder Council Vrexath called an emergency session. Around the council chamber, representatives from all 4 species of the Collective gathered, all watching the recording again. They watched a human catch a blade that should have killed him, watched him hold it despite impossible pain, watched him turn certain death into victory through nothing but will and tactical thinking. "Analysis," Vrexath demanded. The military advisor stood, his data displays showing complex calculations. The humans shouldn't have been able to do this. But our error is clear now. We've been measuring human physical capabilities and assuming those measurements define their combat potential. We were wrong. Humans compensate for physical limitations through pattern recognition, tactical prediction, and pain tolerance that exceeds anything we've encountered. They aren't fast enough to react to attacks, so they predict them. They aren't strong enough to win direct confrontation, so they find other ways to win. They feel pain but fight through it anyway. And they learn, another council member added. We've reviewed all combat footage from the war. Early in the conflict, humans fell quickly in close combat. But with each engagement, survivors adjusted their tactics. They learned where our armor was weak. They learned how we move. They learned to predict rather than react. Every battle where humans survived made the next battle harder for us. Vrexath watched the recording again, watching Foster's face as he caught the blade. There was pain there, yes, but also determination that bordered on inhuman. If we continue this war, they will continue to adapt. Continue to learn. Continue to find ways to turn their disadvantages into advantages. Is this assessment correct? Yes, Elder Council. And more than that, they don't surrender. We've killed millions of them, destroyed dozens of their colonies, defeated them in every major engagement. By all logical standards, they should have surrendered months ago. Instead, they fight harder. They'll never stop fighting, never stop adapting, never stop finding ways to hurt us. We can win every battle and still lose the war because they simply won't quit. The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Vrexath spoke the words no one wanted to hear but everyone had been thinking. Open diplomatic channels with the humans. Offer terms for peace. Generous terms. We're ending this war. But Elder Council, we're winning, someone protested. Are we? Vrexath asked, gesturing at the screen where Foster still held that blade. Or are we just losing slowly? He stood, his decision made. This war is over. The only question is how many more of both our species die before we admit it. The peace offer came within a week of War Prime Kelthax's death. It arrived not as a demand or ultimatum, but as a genuine request for negotiation. The Vrexian Collective proposed terms that shocked human leadership. Complete withdrawal from human space, reparations for destroyed colonies, technology exchange on equal terms, and formal recognition of humanity as a sovereign power. Commander Jake Morrison received the orders to escort the diplomatic envoys with a mixture of relief and disbelief. The last time he'd escorted diplomats to meet the Vrexians, it had ended with 15,000 dead at Outpost 7. This time felt different, but he kept his weapons ready anyway. Trust would take time to rebuild, if it ever could be. The peace talks were held aboard the UES Horizon, Jake's ship chosen specifically because it had been present at first contact. The Vrexian delegation arrived in a single ship, unarmed and with minimal crew. It was a gesture of trust that Jake appreciated even as he maintained full tactical readiness. Once burned, twice careful. Elder diplomat Vrex led the Vrexian delegation. He was older than most Vrexians Jake had seen, his movements slower and more deliberate. He entered the conference room where human negotiators waited and performed what Jake's cultural database identified as a gesture of respect and apology. We come seeking peace, Vrex began, his translator rendering his words in perfect English. Not because we have been defeated militarily, but because we have been defeated conceptually. We thought we understood what your species was. We were wrong. Admiral Greg Foster sat across from Vrex, his hand still bandaged from catching Kelthax's blade. The wounds would heal, though the scars would be permanent. He studied the Vrexian diplomat carefully before responding. You attacked us, killed millions of our people, destroyed our homes, and now you want peace because you realized we won't quit fighting. That's not an apology. That's a tactical reassessment. You are correct, Vrex acknowledged without hesitation. If you wish us to phrase it differently, to add flowery language and diplomatic pleasantries, we can do so. But the truth remains simple. We miscalculated badly, and continuing the war serves neither of our interests. We offer peace not from weakness but from recognition that this conflict has no beneficial end for anyone. What changed? Jake asked from his position by the door. You were winning. Still are, technically. You control more space than we do, destroyed more of our ships than we destroyed of yours, killed more of our people. Why stop now? Vrex turned to face Jake, his large eyes unreadable. Because we finally understood what we were measuring. When we first encountered humanity, we analyzed your physical capabilities, your reaction times, your strength, Your technology. By every metric, you were inferior. We expected a short war ending in your surrender or extinction. He paused. We never measured your adaptability. Your determination. Your refusal to accept limitations we considered absolute. Every battle you lost taught you something. Every defeat made you more dangerous. And watching Admiral Foster catch a blade that should have killed him made us realize that all our measurements meant nothing. Foster shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable being the center of the discussion. I just did what needed to be done. Any of my people would have done the same. Exactly, Vrex replied. That's what we finally understood. You didn't catch that blade because you were physically capable of it. You caught it because the alternative was unacceptable to you. You redefined what was possible through sheer refusal to accept failure. That's not something we've encountered before. That's not something we can defeat through superior technology or physical prowess. Casey Brooks, who'd been listening silently from the pilot station, spoke up. So you're saying you're scared of us now? Because one person did one impossible thing? Not scared, Vrex corrected. Respectful. There is a difference. Fear would drive us to try harder to destroy you. Respect makes us recognize that coexistence is preferable to endless conflict. We could continue this war for years. We would win most battles, but you would learn from each one, adapt, find new ways to hurt us. Eventually, the cost would exceed any benefit. Better to end it now, on terms that benefit both our species. The negotiations continued for 3 days. The Vrexians agreed to withdraw from all claimed human territory, pay reparations for destroyed colonies, and establish formal diplomatic relations. In exchange, humanity agreed to respect collective borders and not expand into their territory. Technology would be exchanged voluntarily rather than forcibly. Cultural exchanges would be encouraged. Both species would maintain military readiness but not target it at each other. It wasn't perfect. Many humans wanted revenge for Outpost 7 and the millions who'd died. Many Vrexians couldn't accept that they'd been outmaneuvered by a primitive species. But it was peace, and after 4 months of brutal war, peace was enough. The formal treaty signing happened in the same conference room where negotiations began. Foster and Vrex both signed the document, their marks representing entirely different forms of writing but carrying the same meaning. This war is over. After the ceremony, Vrex approached Foster privately. I have a question, if you'll permit me. When you caught War Prime Kelthax's blade, you knew it would wound you severely. You knew the pain would be significant. Yet you maintained your grip until the strike was fully stopped. How? Our pain tolerance studies suggest humans should involuntarily release grip when injured that severely. Foster looked at his bandaged hands, flexing them slightly. The doctor said he'd regain full use eventually, but it would take months of therapy. You want the honest answer? I thought about my grandchildren. They're 7 and 9 years old living on Earth. I thought about them watching the Vrexian broadcast of you killing me. I thought about them growing up in a universe where humanity had been conquered because their grandfather couldn't hold onto a knife. So I held on, not because I'm special or heroic, just because I was the one who had to in that moment. Vrex was quiet for a long moment. You endured severe pain to protect children you weren't even certain would see the recording. I was certain enough, Foster replied. And even if they never saw it, someone's children would. Someone's family. That was worth holding on for. We truly did measure the wrong things, Vrex said quietly. We measured bodies and machines. We should have measured hearts and will. It's a mistake we won't make again. The news of the peace treaty spread across human space within hours. Reactions were mixed. Some celebrated, relieved the war was finally over. Others protested, wanting revenge for all they'd lost. But gradually, as the Vrexian fleet actually withdrew, as reparations began arriving, as the killing stopped, acceptance grew. The story of Admiral Foster catching the blade spread even faster. It became legend, the moment when humanity proved they couldn't be measured by normal standards. Different versions emerged, some more dramatic than others, but the core remained the same. A human had done the impossible because the alternative was unacceptable. 5 years later, Jake Morrison found himself teaching at the new Interspecies Military Academy, a joint human-Vrexian institution designed to promote understanding and prevent future conflicts. He was showing his students, both human and Vrexian, the recording of Foster catching the blade. What do we learn from this? Jake asked after the video ended. A young Vrexian student raised one of her forearms. That physical measurements aren't everything in combat. That tactics and determination matter as much as strength and speed. Partly correct, Jake acknowledged. What else? A human student spoke up. That we should never give up even when the math says we can't win. Also partly correct. But you're both missing the most important lesson. Jake paused, making sure everyone was paying attention. The real lesson is that we almost destroyed each other because we didn't try to understand each other first. The Vrexians measured human bodies and decided we were inferior. We saw Vrexian strength and feared we couldn't compete. Both sides saw only what made us different, not what we could learn from each other. He gestured at the mixed classroom, humans and Vrexians studying together. This is what Admiral Foster's sacrifice earned us. Not just peace, but the opportunity to actually know each other. To learn that Vrexian efficiency combined with human adaptability makes both species stronger. To discover that working together achieves more than fighting ever could. After class, Jake returned to his office and found a message waiting. It was from Greg Foster, now retired and living on Earth with his family. The message was short. Teaching the next generation well, I see. Proud of you, Commander. Keep reminding them why we fought and why we stopped fighting. Both lessons matter, Greg. Jake smiled and saved the message. Foster was right as usual. The war had taught humanity that they could face impossible odds and survive. The peace was teaching them that survival wasn't the highest achievement. Understanding was. Cooperation was. Building something better together than either species could build alone. In the decades that followed, the story of the blade continued to spread across the galaxy. Other species heard about the human who caught death bare-handed, about the war that ended because one side finally understood what they were really fighting. It became more than just a story about one moment in one battle. It became a lesson about